Just to let members know, Councillor Vasma has put in a question on whistleblowing, and I don't know if he's listening at the moment, but we'll be looking at that in when we look at the report number 6, which is the whistleblowing report.
The meeting is now live. Okay,
thank you. Thank you. Well, welcome everybody to the this meeting of the Audit Committee, and as chairman I have a note to read out before we start. So, good afternoon and welcome to this meeting of the Audit Committee. I am Councillor Peter Adams, Chairman of the committee. I'm obliged to inform you that this meeting is being live streamed and recorded. Members of the public will be able to hear the audio of the meeting and view the papers shown on the screen. This meeting is being held using remote technology, and should any committee member experience technical difficulties during the meeting, they should immediately contact the designated IT officer on the number they have already been supplied with. Everyone is requested to mute their microphones unless asked to speak. Please only use the chat function to indicate the desire to speak, and do not use it for anything else, so it is clear who is speaking, who is asking to speak, and the debate has to be heard by those who are listening on the auto feed. As chair, I will interpret the council's existing standing orders in light of the requirements of remote participation, with advice from the monitoring officer prior to making a ruling. At the start of the meeting, I'll ask members of the committee to confirm their presence and any disclosable pecuniary interest they have in any items on the agenda. I will ask everyone that speaks during the meeting, including members of the committee and officers, to introduce themselves each time before they speak. This is so that those listening know who is speaking. I'm now going to do the roll call and ask for disclosable pecuniary interests. Members are reminded to disclose any pecuniary interest in the matters discussed which is not included in the register of interest, and leave the meeting prior to the matter being discussed. So now, Councillor Brian Williams, are you present?
Present, no interest to disclose.
Thank you. Councillor Michael Wood.
Councillor Michael Wood, present and no interest to declare.
Councillor Chris Mellings.
Present, Chairman, and no interest to declare.
Councillor Johan Jones.
Present and nothing to declare.
And the same with me, Councillor Peter Adams, no interest to declare. I'm now going to turn to the items on the agenda. First, receive apologies. So from the roll there, we have no apologies. No, we've dealt with pecuniary interest. So we go to item 3 on the agenda. Minutes of the previous meeting. Do I have any queries on that?
Happy to propose them, Chairman. Chris Mellings, member of the committee.
Proposed by Councillor Mellings. Do I have a seconder?
You do indeed, Councillor Michael Wood, seconding the
okay. Righto. So I take it that they are now, we'll take that at them as being passed. We'll go on to public question time, item 4. And there are no public questions under this section. We now go to item 5, first line assurance, digital transformation update, and we should have an officer to present a report. Do we have one?
Chair, yes you do. It's Michelle Leith here, Director of Workforce and Transformation.
Oh, you are. Oh, jolly good. Thank you. Could I just ask everybody, not just you, it's just that you're the first, can presentations, as this is a long agenda, be concise and to the point, and the same with questions afterwards? Okay, thank you. Sorry, Michelle.
Not a problem, Chair. Happy to do that. You have before you a report on where we are in the transformation journey. I have presented regularly to Audit Committee about the digital transformation programme, and each time I've been really keen to stress that this has been a whole programme, and each of the work streams have delivered some significant benefits to the organisation, not least I think that on the 22nd, 23rd of March, when the Prime Minister said you need to stay at home, you need to work from home, Shropshire Council was able to, and that is definitely to do with the investment in the infrastructure, the investment in updated services, the Nutanix, which is what drives our connectivity, and our rollout of Office 365. Without that, we would not have been able to work and literally keep the lights on throughout this really difficult period. So in the sense of being quite brief about that, I think even the meeting today is a demonstration of how effective the digital transformation programme has been. Yes, we have had some things along the way. The ERP proved particularly difficult, but if you put that into context, that affected everybody and everything. But it now enables us to work in remote ways, as does Liquid Logic, as does the infrastructure, and we can do more now with the population of Shropshire in terms of their access to services online. And more than that, we can do an awful lot more around data. We have been able to use the improvements in the systems to give public health the much needed data that they need around where our vulnerable people are and what help they need. So that's what I would like to say about the sort of like impact of our transformation, but I'm happy to take any questions on the report.
Right. Thank you, Michelle. Just a point to councillors, if you wish to speak, could you use the chat session, type a message in saying I wish to speak. And the first one I have is from Councillor Yohan Jones. Yohan?
Yohan Jones here. Could you, with so much home working, how can you assure us that time abuse is not taking place?
Okay, we have the ability to report on the use of the network, whether you're working from home or whether you're working in one of the offices. We have the ability to do that, but we have also been working with managers. One of the things that has been really necessary with this remote working is for managers to be more involved with speaking to their staff and supporting their staff in what in some cases is difficult or are difficult working conditions, and to make sure that from a mental health perspective they're okay, and that also involves obviously monitoring their work. It's also, though, because of people's personal circumstances, it also means that people are not necessarily working 9 to 5. They may be working early in the morning, late in the evening, because they have caring responsibilities during the day. But the technology has enabled them and us to get the job done.
Okay. Okay, Yohan?
Thank you. Yeah.
Okay, right. I also have Chris Mellings wishes to speak. Councillor Chris Mellings.
Thank you, Chairman. Chris Mellings, member of the committee. Thanks for the report, Michelle. And I think that one of the, if I can call it one of the positives, sorry, I probably don't quite mean it like that, of the last few months has been an early demonstration of the value of the programme that's been implemented in recent times. And I guess none of us could have sort of foresaw that we perhaps sort of see such a major and early demonstration of that. So in many respects, the information that's in the report and the experiences that have been have helped to demonstrate that. Conscious of the chairman's remark, I'll just concentrate on paragraph 4.7, which refers to the staff survey. And I don't know how many responses there were, because obviously sometimes percentages don't always give you the sort of the full picture. But whilst for some of the questions the response rate is quite high, but obviously with things like IT access and the experience of meetings and interactions, there's at least 30%, it would appear, that are not happy, satisfied, call it what you want. And I just wonder, have we taken the opportunity to drill down below that headline information to understand what those issues are and what we can do better? And then just very quickly as well, what's not within the paper, but at some point, is it possible to have a table showing what the costs have been, what the savings are, efficiency? I know some of the efficiencies are talked about in the paper, particularly through the last few months, and also the sort of the non-financial savings as well, just so that we get a full rounded picture of the system or the programme as a whole. Thanks very much.
Okay, certainly, Chris. There were 1,678 returns from around about 2,700 people. I think the figures are slightly skewed by the fact that a chunk of the workforce, Shire Services staff, for example, don't require IT access. So that may have skewed some of those figures. For me, the really big ones were the fact that the percentage of staff who were able to work from home and were happy to continue doing so with the bigger sort of aspects for me. In relation to things that we could do better, actually through the business continuity group, what we have done is surveyed those staff that said they couldn't work from home to try to work out why and whether or not we could support them. So those percentages are going down as well. In relation to a rounded picture, absolutely yes, we can provide that financial breakdown. To be fair, I did think you'd had some of that before, but I'm happy to report that back. But I also think that one of the biggest savings that I think this will enable us to do, and the recent decision by full council around Shire Hall itself, I think there was confidence to do that and to make that decision because of the technology and how we've been able to work during this really difficult period. So clearly that will be a massive saving as well.
Okay, thank you, Chris. I've got no one else wishing to speak. Oh,
Peter, Brian Williams here. I apologise. I've not been to a meeting with the chat where the chat function's been used. At pensions, we didn't use the chat function. We put our hands up, and right. I don't know how to type in speak please. So right. I apologise for that. I wanted to ask Michelle, if we turn to page 16, item 6, the financial implications, you will see that there's a 2-line entry which is self-explanatory. I wonder whether Michelle could expand on that, please, because I don't quite understand what it means.
So of the
item 6.1 on page 16.
Yeah. So of the original budget that was allocated to the digital transformation programme by full council 2017, I think it was. Of that, towards the end of the programme, it was identified that we could give back to the council, or not borrow, £3 million, and of the balance there is still a small amount left. So my point is that from the original expectation, we have actually spent less money than we anticipated.
Well, that sounds like good news anyway. Thank you, Michelle.
Okay.
Peter, I'm having struggle with the chat button because I've been clicking on it to no avail, and I just want to say a few words.
Right, go ahead. Yep.
I just want to say initially that in 3.1, Michelle, it's July 16 since you and I took the report to council to commence this digital transformation, and how prophetic, in spite of the doubt as it's proved to be, because we wouldn't have been in the position we are today to cope with the pandemic if that decision hadn't been taken, and much input, of course, from various officers along the way. I just wanted to go along to 4.3 and congratulate you and the team in us being able to cope with the pandemic, but wanted then to go on to say Now, I don't know how other members are also getting this, but there is a certain reticence amongst, if that's the correct word, about working from home and how they're finding four walls to be quite a challenge at times. And I see then that we go on to talk about mental welfare, and I do hope and trust that we are looking at this very carefully, because obviously, you know, certain officers probably won't say, or some officers will say, but yes, I believe it is going to be an ongoing problem. On the matter of the costs, Brian, I'm very delighted to say that if you look at the last paragraph of 4.6, considerable savings have been seen in electricity and gas costs, and that again is to be applauded. I did make one other point, and that was about the mediation sessions that you've been carrying out in 5.0. And just to reiterate, I do think it's this mental welfare that we all have to be very conscious of. Thank you.
Absolutely, Michael. Our staff's well-being is really important. We have got again, working with some outside agencies and working with public health. We have got some of them are online tools, some of them are face-to-face tools, some of them are about upskilling managers to support staff in mental health. We're also encouraging people to take annual leave. It is very easy to be sat at a computer from morning till night, not having moved at all. So we're also looking at ways in which we can say, you need to build in breaks. You need to make sure that you have a regular breaks through the day, and that you get up and move around and get some fresh air if you can. It's really important that we do that. We're also encouraging staff to, what we've been calling them, have virtual coffee breaks, which is around calling up, okay, by Skype, but calling up colleagues who they normally work with and touching base with them, either to talk about work activity or to talk about social activity, but to make sure that they are keeping those networks alive, even if it's in a virtual way. A couple of teams on a Friday night after work, I've had a virtual pub session, as it were. They would normally have perhaps gone to a pub or gone out socially. They weren't able to do that, so after work on a Friday they've got together, had a Teams meeting or a Zoom meeting, and had a social event that way. So there are lots of ways in which we're trying to help, but it is very important that we do keep that message out there that you need to look after yourself.
Peter, thank you, Michelle. I've been making one or two not virtual pub meetings, but that's another story altogether. But on that matter of virtual breaks, yeah. I've been involved in a number of meetings where they've gone on literally for hours, and one police meeting went on from 9 in the morning till 2:30. And I think we have to be mindful of councillors being stuck behind a screen for lengthy periods, and so the message is for both staff and for members. Thank you, Peter.
That's right. Well, I was going to announce at the end of this that we're going to follow council methodology, and we'll have a break every 1.5 hours. So we will have a break at 3 o'clock for 10 minutes. So thank you, Michelle, for bringing that to that point to our attendant as well. Now, I've got no more speakers, so I need a proposer and a seconder for the recommendations at the bottom of page 11 on 2.1. Do I have a proposer?
Councillor Michael Wood moved the recommendations.
Thank you. Do I have a second?
Joan Jones, second.
Joan Jones to second. Right. So I now, under this new system, have to call you all out again. Councillor Williams, you're voting to accept the recommendations.
I accept the recommendations.
Righto. Councillor Michael Wood.
For the recommendation.
Councillor Chris Mellins.
For.
And Councillor Joan Jones.
For.
Okay, so that's carried, and we'll now go on to item 6. Now, before we go to item 6, Michelle, I think, is introducing this. There will then be the normal councillors' questions to Michelle, and then we have a question on this report from Councillor David Vasma. So we'll take it in that order. So if Michelle is ready to proceed with that.
Yes, certainly, Chair. Again, in the interest of being quite brief, the report sets out the background, the details of what whistleblowing is and when we get reports, and there are charts in there of whistleblowing activity, reports that have happened and how they've been dealt with. So in that sense, I think that the report is fairly self-explanatory. We have had a decrease in the number of incidents that have been reported. We could expect that during the period of time that we've had, but having said that, all the information is in the report. I'm happy to take questions.
Okay, thank you. Before we start on questions,
Peter, I'm not hearing you. Brian Williams.
I think the chair is on mute.
Oh,
Brian.
sorry. I was on mute. I do apologise. To Tim Ward, I've got item 6, request to speak. Who from? Is Tim there?
Sorry, Chair. I just put that title in so that you know where the request to speak are coming from.
Okay, thank you very much, Tim. Right, so Michelle has presented the report. Have any of the members of the committee any questions to ask? No, right. Councillor David Vasma, are you there? Hello?
Yes, I'm here, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, can you put your question now, please?
Yes, will do. When was the council's whistleblowing policy last reviewed? In the light of evidence I have, which suggests that the council's whistleblowing policy does not protect whistleblowers, will the committee recommend the council's policy be reviewed? At the moment, there is a danger that people who have concerns do not come forward, which will be to the detriment of the council's audit function and call into question its good governance.
Okay, thank you. Do I have a reply for that, Kerry?
Yes, Chair. Thank you for the question. The speaking up about wrongdoing or whistleblowing policies for both staff and the public were reviewed in December 2019 and reflect best practice. I believe that what Councillor Vasma is concerned about is the application of the policy, and he's right to raise this with committee if he is. Whilst I can't enter a discussion about the details behind the questions, of which I believe I'm fully briefed following several meetings with the councillor, the previous EO and the monitoring officer, I can respond to the principles raised. All whistleblowers are taken very seriously and considered in full, and this report demonstrates that to Audit Committee. I strongly believe that the whistleblowing policy does protect the whistleblower, and I have no evidence that supports the potential dangers highlighted by the councillor in that people won't come forward, so I would suggest that the policy does not need reviewing. That said, committee members may want a discussion with the councillor and myself in the right setting to explore the detailed concerns held by the councillor and to establish directly for themselves if there is an issue with the application of the whistleblowing policy, and members can always then request a report to come back to this committee on the basis of transparency. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Michelle, would you like to make a comment?
I would simply like to reiterate that whistleblowing is taken very seriously. It is a really for us, it is really important that where people see wrongdoing, they feel confident in being able to report it, and that it will be appropriately investigated, and that their anonymity will be preserved in many cases. So I would like to reiterate Kerry's points and to say we would welcome the scrutiny of it still further if committee wish to do so, because whistleblowing represents a way in which we can identify wrongdoing should it be happening.
Thank you. Thank you. Right, committee members, you've heard the question and you've heard Kerry's and Michelle's answer. Do you have any points to make on it?
Brian Williams here.
Yes.
I haven't heard anything which would make me believe that it's necessary to revise our policy that we only looked at in December 2019, 8 months ago. Any councillor can be dissatisfied, as plainly Councillor Vasner is, with the outcome of a whistleblowing request. But if it's been fully investigated, we have to accept that. So I'm not in favour of any further review at this time of the whistleblowing policy.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Melling, I think I've got you down.
Yes, thanks, Chairman. Following Kerry's response to the question, I think the question does raise some issues, and I think the suggested way forward, with obviously without making a judgment, because obviously members of the Audit Committee aren't aware of the detail, I think the suggested course of action for us to hold on an informal basis, I'm presuming, to discuss the issue, and then on the basis of that, I think that would indicate whether there is a need to consider the policy further. But I personally don't think we're able to reach that judgment today. So I think the suggested course of action by Kerry is a helpful one to take this forward. Okay. So I would support that.
Okay, so just a quick one on an informal discussion, Kerry. Who would you have the informal discussion with?
Kerry Pulaski, Chair. I'm happy to have that informal discussion with a selection from the Audit Committee or the full Audit Committee, and with the Councillor Vasmer present as well, to go through the concerns.
Okay, thank you.
Chairman, not being aware, Councillor Michael Wood, not being aware of the circumstances to which Councillor Vasmer is referring, I'm presuming that he feels, as an elected member, that there is an issue to be addressed. I'm not sure it warrants the meeting of a full Audit Committee in order to do that informal discussion. And so I think that as this is a specific case, perhaps Kerry, yourself and Councillor Vasmer could take this one stage further, and then if you were the door going to slam, and it has done in the wind, if you're content to come back to us if you thought that there was something to some reasoning to amend the whistleblowing practices, then yes, we could have a full meeting or bring it to the next meeting of the Audit Committee in full, if that meets your approval.
Councillor Vasmer here, you're muted, Chair.
So I'll mute myself so I don't interrupt you all the time. Yeah, you want to make a supplementary comment?
Sorry,
someone should have been muted, yes. Right. Right, do you want to make a supplementary comment?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Councillor Vasmer here. Yeah, I very much support the proposal that the Officer Kerry came up with, and hopefully we can have some meeting where I can discuss some of the details of my concerns, and then perhaps, as has been suggested, then it could be brought back to committee, because there are some very serious concerns I have, and I would like those to be given greater consideration.
Thank you. Anyone else has a comment? No. Right, can I suggest this then? Firstly, that we accept the recommendation. We accept the recommendation on page 19, but we also ask Kerry to organise an informal meeting with the various people to discuss the individual points. Would that suffice?
Well, I'm quite happy to leave it as Michael Wood suggested.
Yeah.
To you, Brian Williams here. I'm quite happy to leave it as Michael Wood suggested, to you and Kerry and Councillor Vasner, and leave it to your judgment as to how you then want to proceed from there.
Okay, we'll go with that. Okay, but we'll accept the formal recommendation, and then just Kerry can me and Councillor Vasmer can get on with an informal discussion outside this meeting. Okay, so there is a recommendation on page 19. Consider and approve the contents of the report. Do I have a proposer for that?
Owen Jones.
Johan, and a seconder?
Councillor Michael Ward seconding.
Okay, again, I have to go through it all again with you. Brian, do you support that recommendation?
I do.
Okay, Michael Woods?
I seconded it, Chairman.
Yes, I know. I still have to go through it. Councillor Chris Mellins?
For.
And Councillor Owen Jones?
For.
Okay, thank you. That one is has gone through with the caveat that we'll have an informal discussion in the fullness of time. Right, we go to item 7, third line assurance, internal audit annual reports. And is this being presented by Kerry?
Yes, please, Chair. So Kerry Plasky, Head of Audit.
Right.
This report provides members the details of the work undertaken by Audit for the year ended 31st of March 2020. I'm not going to go through the full details, but can confirm that the revised plan has been delivered in compliance with the SIRES and to the satisfaction of customers. Good and reasonable assurances were made in the year, accounting for 64% of the opinions delivered, and it represents a 3% decrease in the high levels of assurance compared to previous years, offset by a 3% increase in limited and unsatisfactory opinions. Full details of the work appear in your appendices and tables throughout the report. At the end of the year, I come to an opinion on the governance, risk and control environment of the Council, and can confirm that this is limited. Table 11 in your appendices provides the different opinions that I can select from. In reaching my opinion, I've considered the work completed alongside my knowledge of the wider known environment at the Council. I can confirm that I have been free from interference, but towards the end of the year, the onset of COVID and the mobilisation of business continuity plans naturally impacted on the work, and Audit responded well to that, readjusting its approach, evaluation and prioritisation of risks. In practice, this saw agreement between key system service managers of a reduced scope audit, reduced testing, and in some cases an arrangement to complete audit work without the full management responses, to allow the services to deal with the pandemic with a commitment that the known issues in the control environment will be revisited by managers in the near future as things settle. Members are also aware of the new IT platforms that we've just discussed in the earlier report, and it's natural to see the embedding of these impact on the control environment in the short term. So my opinion at this stage is limited. In addition to planned work, auditors have continued to add value to the Council, advising in system controls ahead of new setups, providing advice on financial governance and counter-fraud measures, and specific examples of which appear in your report in paragraph 6.23. At this point, I'm going to take a pause, and I'm happy to take any members' questions. Thank you, Chair.
Okay. Right.
Brian, Peter, you've muted again. Peter, you muted.
Hello, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes,
Does anyone wish to speak from the members? Is that Brian?
And Chris and myself, Michael Wood.
Right. Okay. So, right. Can we start with Brian? Did you want to speak? Sorry, nothing's coming up on my screen at the moment. I think you're muted as well.
Right, I'm unmuted now.
Right, that's it.
I don't know how to type it up on chat. I say I've been familiar with the hands up signal previously.
That's it. Just wave. Just wave. We can see you on screen at the moment.
I'll blow you a kiss, Peter. Right.
You've muted yourself again, Brian.
Brian, you need to unmute yourself again.
Sorry, crumbs. Sorry, Peter.
That's it.
Right. I was going to say that I'm very pleased indeed to note the percentage of customers satisfied with our service. This is in 628 on page 34, in which we find that the satisfaction level there is 80%, 87%. And if you turn across the page to 632 on page 35, you find the percentage of customers scoring the service as high or excellent has increased to 95%. I think these figures are absolutely staggering, because I would have guessed that most people would have regarded audit as a necessary nuisance to be accepted as essential, but detracting from other work, particularly at the coronavirus this stage. And so I'm very pleased indeed, and I think Kerry and her team are to be congratulated on that level of customers satisfied at 87%, and those who even more who think the service is high or excellent at 95%. And we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that we apparently have a very, very, as we know, a very good audit service indeed.
Okay, thank you. I would congratulate the head of audit there, but I know that she gets embarrassed, you see, if we do that. So, Chris Mellings, you wish to speak?
Yes, thanks, Chairman. Hope everybody can hear me. Chris Mellings, member of the committee. Yeah, I endorse what has been said in terms of the work of the team, which is much appreciated. However, I think we have to recognise that there's a very strong message from this report, and that's the fact that Kerry is only able to give us and the council limited assurance as to the overall performance of the council during the year. And I think for me, the most significant item is table 3 on page 17, which is as regards the fundamental systems that support the work of the council. And there are 9 systems that are listed. Of that 9, 6 are either limited or unsatisfactory, leaving just 3 that are good or reasonable. And if you look on page 38, the direction of travel overall seems to be going downwards. Now, I know certainly in recent months, as we've already acknowledged today, issues relating to COVID-19 and what impact that has on the council. But even setting that aside, I think there are some concerns that are listed in the audits that have been carried out. And I suppose the question for us as a committee going forward, what is it that we need to do to try and turn that around? Now, I don't underestimate the challenge with COVID and then the financial consequences, etc. But the systems that support the council should still be sound and robust to support whatever work, whatever situation that we're facing. Now, I don't know, that might be just a rhetorical question. It may be that we haven't got any specific answers as such, but I think as a committee, we perhaps just need to focus over the coming year on what it is that as an organisation we need to do to move that up out of the limited category, because I don't think that's good for the council. And it's certainly not good for the people of Shropshire that we all represent. Sorry, that sounds a bit of a sort of a negative view, but I think that's what the report is telling us, and that's what we need to pick up on. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay, thank you, Chris. I think one of the things is that every year Kerry does, the head of audit does tell us what her priorities are, what her resources are, and how she's going to maximise those resources for the benefit of the council. And I'm sure that she will continue to do so. Would that be right, Kerry?
Yes, Chair. Where we are as well is we're going to bring a refresh of the audit plan to the September committee. As we do every audit committee, we bring a refresh based on the current risks and our knowledge as of today going forward. And as you're aware, any audit areas that attraction and satisfactory assurance will definitely be re-audited in the current year and reported back to the committee.
Thank you. Just to put one thing on, the fact there's a limited assurance given this year is indicative of partly the success of the audit committee, because it is finding what it's meant to find, place areas of the council that are underperforming, and makes recommendations to them so that they can improve themselves, and they also give help and support to those departments. So I think, though there's a limited assurance being given, from the audit department's point of view, that is their job. And finding if she hadn't found these things, we may be in trouble, but the fact they have been found indicates the system is working. Michael, did you want to say anything?
Again, I do support Chris, and I don't think it's an out-and-out criticism, but just to point to the opening paragraph of the report, that it is up to the end of March 2020, so that was in actual fact before COVID struck. And like Chris, I'd like to see the trend upward, or even if it was a 50% upward, it would give me a little bit more satisfaction. So I think it's certainly something that we as an audit committee should certainly be noting. I picked up something else on page 37 as you start to go through the it's 15 of the small print and 39, sorry, of the large print page, and that's the full details of the reasonableness or good or indifferent. And when you turn the page, I came to one that was Trinity C of E School, and I thought, well, that's one of mine. And then you turn on to the next page, which is page 4117. And there it is, and it was only thought that I wasn't being particularly critical of Trinity, and I don't know the background to that, but it seems to me that we always seem to be having the schools come up, and whether there was some kind of an overall trend that we're seeing, Kerry, that schools seem to be something that you have to pay specific attention to. And then there was another one of quite trivia really, but of interest, and I caught it at 615 on page 31, that we do external client work. It is, I suppose it may be a little bit trivial, it may not be, but who pays? Do we recover in full? Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Right, I don't know if Kerry's got an answer to that.
Yes, I do have, Chair. So it's Kerry Plofsky, Head of Audit. Two questions then. So schools, yes, we audit them because we have to give assurance to the Section 151 officer for the grants that we get from the government for schools. And so where we find there may be trends across a number of schools, we do talk to the relevant director and we help support the schools through the mechanisms that are set up in the local authority for this. Second question, in terms of external work, we do have a number of external clients, and yes, they pay for the service. We're allowed to break even with our external clients, and that's what we aim to do. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you. Right, now I've got Julie Files wants to make an important procedural point. So if she's there, could she come on and make it?
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to draw your attention to when you're taking the vote. If you're accepting all the recommendations within the report without making any alterations or amendments, as Chair, you can, once they've been proposed or seconded, you can accept the recommendations. You just need to ask if anybody wishes to indicate differently. That will save you reading the names out. Good.
Right, thank you. I was hoping you were going to say something like that. Right, okay. Having said that, we now go to the acceptance of the recommendations of report number 7, which are to be found at the top of page 26, A, B and C. Do I have a... Sorry, Peter, yes?
I had another comment to make.
Sorry. Put your comment in, sorry.
I've been trying to wave at you, as I say, but
yeah.
Right, I'd like members to turn to page 38 of the report. And these are the tables. And I have a couple of points to make on this. One of the problems, I think, is that we compare the figures for one year with another without actually comparing the detail. So if we look at the unsatisfactory figures, there were 4 in the 2018-19 audit. We've gone up to 10. What would really worry me very much is if some of those 10 were the same 4. In other words, I would hope that what we're seeing as a result of our audit work this year will be reflected in the following year. And I would hope that if we look at 2018-19, the 4 unsatisfactory would at least have moved up to limited this year, and the 17 limited would have moved up to reasonable this year. Are we happy with the direction of travel of the individual audits which have previously come out as unsatisfactory or limited? That's one point. If Kerry would like to respond to that, I'll then perhaps have the opportunity of putting the other point.
Thank you, Chair. Kerry Pulaski, Head of Audit. I can confirm that we follow this through, and if there are areas that are not improving in their direction of travel, that have an unsatisfactory assurance, we do tend to report these and highlight these back to the committee. The limited ones, we sometimes rely on the managers to improve that direction of travel. That depends on resources. We try and cover them, but we don't necessarily cover all limited ones in a given 12-month period. But when we go back to them, we do put a direction of travel on the individual audit reports, and we can always provide that data as well to members. But if there is an issue and I'm seeing something not change, I do highlight it in my reports to you, and I would bring your attention to it, Chair.
Thank you.
Is that okay? Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah,
Brian,
okay.
Thank you. Right, Chris Belling. Sorry.
Point I wish to make on this report. If you're on the same page, but the previous table, table 1, if we look at school children's services other, you will find that of our original plan of audit days for 139, the revised plan showed 66, which was only 48% of the original plan. But if we go to the actual, we find it's even reduced from there. We're only completing 21% of the planned audits in this section. And I wonder whether Kerry could comment on the reasons for that, please.
Thank you, Chair. Kerry Pulaski, Head of Audit. In terms of the children's services work, this happens sometimes. We have a plan of work that we're going to do, and in this case, we had some unplanned areas of activity to look at within Children's Services Directorate, which are charged to the contingencies and other chargeable work. So I could have enough assurance about the controls in children's services, but they're not purely marked against the original plan. that shows in that table. So there was work done, but it's within the 92% and the 106% completed of the contingencies and other chargeable work. So it's unplanned work where the risks have changed throughout the year and we've moved our focus, but it's still given assurance on children's services, and it's the way we report it, Brian.
Okay, Kerry, thank you for that. That's quite clear. It looks, the figure of percentage of original complete at 21 is so far out of line with every other set of audits that we do that it does give rise for query. But you've answered that. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Chris Mellings, did you wish to come in again?
Yeah. Thank you, Chairman. Sorry to add to it. I just wanted to respond to something that that Brian said in his first point. And there are two levels here, I think. What Brian says is absolutely right in terms of the individual audits and what happens in those service areas going forward. But I think as a committee, having a strategic view, if I can put it like that, it's having an idea to where the direction of travel is as regards the council's overall internal control environment, and what the table 2 at the bottom of 38 obviously demonstrates is whether that's going up or down. So I think it's also reflecting on that overall environment as well as the contribution that individual audits make to that. And obviously the fact that we've got the limited assurance is suggesting that that direction of travel sadly is going in the wrong direction. But as has been pointed out as part of the audit plan for the current year going forward, hopefully that can start to address some of the issues. And whilst I'm still on, subject to any other comments, I'm happy to move the recommendations that are listed at the top of page 26.
Okay, do I have any?
Second.
Second, right. Do I have anyone disagreeing? No, in that case, we'll carry that then, thank you. And we now go on to item paper 8, third line assurance, annual review of internal audit, quality assurance and improvement programme 2019-20. And it is James, I think, to introduce this.
Thank you, Chair. James Walton here, the Council's Director of Finance. So I'll very briefly introduce this paper for everyone. This is the annual review that we undertake every year of internal audit. This is in line with the public sector internal audit standards that we follow, and the quality assurance and improvement programme sets out the requirements of that review. Each year the review is undertaken. And we identify in this report any areas where the internal audit function is not complying with the code. So first thing to say is that we comply in all areas. There's no areas where we don't comply, but there are a couple of areas where we would consider this to be partial compliance. So these two areas have been discussed each year because they're the standard areas that we highlight, but they're identified in paragraph 6.8 and 6.9. So very quickly, just to pick those up, 6.8 talks about the objectivity standard, and this states that internal audit should not take part in any activity because that would impair their unbiased assessment. And what we consider here is that in terms of the function, trying to add value to the organisation, they may provide advice early in any particular system being developed or process being put in place. And if that's the case, then there is a question then about whether they can give an unbiased assessment. Now, we actually make sure that different auditors take part in different pieces of work to ensure that that's not an issue. But nevertheless, in terms of transparency, we would argue that that is only partial compliance with the code. The other one in paragraph 6.9 is around independence and objectivity standard, and this is really about the best best practice in terms of the chief internal auditor, the head of internal audit, I should say, being appointed by the board, their remuneration, etc., being considered by the board, that being the audit committee. And obviously, the role falls under the Finance Governance and Assurance Directorate, and so therefore appointments are made within the requirements of the Council's terms and conditions, and IS Section 151 officer would make decisions around budget and resources within the internal audit team, and in terms of the appointment of the head of internal audit. So again, we would argue that that doesn't necessarily counter the code, but in terms of true transparency, we would argue that is partial conformance rather than full conformance. So I'm happy to take any questions on that, but it's just to confirm that we don't believe any of those areas of partial conformance are significant in any way. Thank you.
Thank you, James.
Move the recommendation, Chairman.
Do I have a seconder? Do I have a seconder?
I second Brian Williams.
Okay, anyone dissenting? No, the recommendation on page 51 then is carried, and we go on to agenda item 9, which is second line assurance financial outturn report 2019 to 20. And again, it's James.
Thank you, Chair. James Walton, Council's Director of Finance. So I'll briefly introduce this report. So this is the financial outturn report. Just to be clear, this is the report for the 1920 financial year. This was taken to Cabinet earlier in the month, and the recommendations are set out within this report were the recommendations that went to Cabinet. So the entire report is taken here. This is what we usually do, and it allows Audit Committee then to consider that overall outturn report. So although that includes within the report details of the overspend from last year, which is about £1.7 million, and also details around the capital expenditure representing 83% of the budget at the end of the year. The purpose of this paper coming to internal audit is not to scrutinise the unders or overspends, but more around compliance with the financial the financial management standards that were talked about to the committee just before the meeting began. So throughout the year, quarterly reports are produced, and those quarterly reports showing income and expenditure variation across the council's revenue account and the council's capital account are taken to Cabinet and considered. At the end of the year, we produce the council statement of accounts, which is the next item on the agenda. And in terms of transparency, it's quite difficult to see the council statement of accounts and refer that back and reflect that back against the quarterly monitoring reports that are produced. So in taking the financial outturn report through to Cabinet and also through to Audit Committee, it allows for that consideration at Audit Committee of the processes behind the creation of these reports, the information that's contained within it, the transparency and the consideration of the risks as the year progresses. So I won't go any further than that, other than to say, in terms of the recommendations in the report, those were the Cabinet recommendations. They're not for Audit Committee to consider. Audit Committee just need to consider whether they are content with the report and ask any questions they wish to around the processes that sit behind it. I'm happy to take any questions, Chair.
Thank you, James. I've got Chris Mellins wishing to ask a question.
Yeah, thanks, Chairman. Thanks, James, for the report. I'm glad that the commentary you gave was framed in the way that it was, because it did feel a little bit like the end of the Lord Mayor's show. And having been to Cabinet, having been to Council, and then I know we normally sort of see it before it goes to Council, but obviously this year, and it's a statement of fact that is the position for the end of the year. So the only question that I've got, and it seems to be one that is a year-to-year sort of issue, and obviously we have a series of savings that are set as part of the budget, and then throughout the year as it's tracked through, there's the table with the red, green and amber. And obviously, in terms of this year, in the red column, there were 6.5 million of undeliverables. Now, I know quite a chunk of a proportion of those have been met with the use of one-offs and have been taken out of the budget going forward. But in terms of sort of process, I just because we seem to have this year to year to year, I just wonder how robust are the processes for firstly identifying what savings, individual savings we want to make, and then the deliverability of it. Because it almost sort of seems, and I don't mean it in an unkind way, but we're almost sort of setting ourselves up to fail, that there are a number of savings that are simply just not deliverable. And I just wonder whether we're able to identify that at an earlier stage when the mix of savings is considered, or whether there are other factors at play. Obviously, where we've had additional one-off monies coming through, that can help offset that. But in the current climate, as to where we're at the moment, who knows how long that might continue. And there may be a day that will come where that could cause us some real issue. So it's really around the process for identifying and delivering to make sure that we deliver what we say we're going to deliver, to ensure that we've got a viable and a sustainable budget going forward. Now, I don't pretend that's an easy measure by any stretch, but that's the sort of the issue that sort of floats around in my head on this anyway. Thanks, Chairman.
So through you, Chair, in terms of the points that are being raised, I absolutely agree with the key issues behind that, which is around the process around the identification, setting of, and then consideration and robustness of the savings proposals that are put forward. So there are two elements to this. I think one element is around whether a saving is deliverable or not in the fullness of time, and then there's a separate one which is around timing. So of the 6.5 million that was identified out of the £18.5 million worth of savings, there was about 3.6 million of that which is still to be delivered. So they were flagged red because they weren't delivered in the financial year that was necessary, but over half of those were actually identified as it was a timing issue, and we still believe they can be delivered. It's just that they couldn't be delivered in the timescale. So there'll be all sorts of factors relating to that, and they are there are issues and considerations that need to be taken into account with that, but that is less of a concern than the savings that are identified and then just can't be delivered. And I think what Councillor Mennings is identifying is, well, surely the process isn't robust enough if you can identify £3 million worth of savings and then not deliver them. There are, of course, a number of reasons why those savings wouldn't be delivered. There are lots of assumptions and expectations made at the start of that, and I think it's a reasonable question to say, could more kind of work and due diligence be done at that time? I think the reality of the situation is where proposals are drawn up with enough kind of time and consideration. So if we were drawing up a saving now in July for implementation from next April, then I think it would be wholly justified to criticise any failure in delivery of those savings that was down to a planning process, because there's enough time to actually consider those issues. I think the problem that we have is often it's later in the year as issues start to be identified. There may well be short-term implications. We're waiting for information in relation to what the following year looks like. There may be other decisions that are taken that are kind of outside of our hands, and it's often those savings that get identified later in the year that we have to find a solution to. And often those are the savings that take longer to deliver. So they may well be delivered, but it takes longer because they actually need to be thought through, and there may be alternatives within that. In terms of improving the process, which is the important thing here, I think that's something that we need to continue to work at. Fundamentally, I think it comes down to resources. I think if we have the right amount of resources across the authority to be able to identify, to consider, and then to implement savings proposals across the organisation, I think that would be that would make a significant difference, and that's where I think the overall failing is. I don't think it's necessarily around the process itself. I think it's more around the amount of time and resource that could be put into delivering a robust plan around that. Nevertheless, that's something that we're looking at, and there is opportunities within things like investor save funds, whereby just using that investor save funding to identify resource to enable a more robust plan to deliver perhaps a bigger saving in the long run is something that we're looking at. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think you're on mute, Chair.
Peter, unmute, please. Peter, you're muted.
Just come off mute at the 4th attempt. Sorry about that. So Councillor Yohan Jones wishes to speak.
Councillor Yohan Jones. On page 71, table 6, movements and reserves, I see there's 13.5 million in bad debt, which is up 1.3 million on last year. What is being done to recover this bad debt? Thank you.
Yeah, for my chair. So in terms of bad debt provision, which I think is the I'm trying to find the reference, but if it's in terms of bad debt provision, effectively that's a calculation that's done on an annual basis to look and identify at what the consideration is. So it's a calculation that's done to look across the board at where there are areas of potential bad debt, and to make an estimate of what that might look like. So that I would expect, I should say, that figure to vary from one year to the next. But I can, if it would be helpful, to get some more information around the reasons for that variation, if necessary, if committee would like to see that.
Yes. I think the fact that Councillor Jones has raised the question means he would like to see more information on that. So if you can feed that back to us via Kerry, I'd be grateful. Okay.
Yep, Chair.
Okay. Right. Does anyone else wish to speak? Right. So we have the proposal, which we are content to accept this report. Do I have a proposer for that?
Yohan Jones.
Councillor Jones. Do I have a seconder?
Ryan Williams.
Ryan Williams. Okay. Does anyone dissent from it? No. Okay, that's gone through. Then we'll accept that. And now we turn to report number 10. Second line assurance. Approval of the council's statement of accounts for 2019 to 20. And again, we have James to introduce it.
Thank you, Chair. James Walton, Council's Director of Finance. So this report is the Council's draft statement of accounts. So this is a standard report that's produced every year, but this year was a little different in terms of timescales on the back of COVID-19 pandemic and the implications that had. So under normal circumstances, the statement of accounts would be produced and signed off by myself on the 31st of May, and then would be audited, and the final position would be available as of today by the 31st of July. Now, this year, because of the implications of the pandemic, those deadlines were pushed back, which meant that the draft statement of accounts didn't actually need to be published until August time, and then the final audited statement of accounts would be by the end of November. So significantly more time to reflect the fact that these were unusual circumstances that we were working towards. So on the back of that, the finance team, in discussion with our external auditors, Grant Thornton, formulated a plan which tried to draw a line between those dates. So we produced the draft statement of accounts by the 9th of July. So this was ahead of the final deadline, but clearly significantly longer than the 31st of May. That would then allow Grant Thornton to undertake their audit work, and the plan at the moment is that we will try to get the published statement of accounts completed by the end of September. Now, what that would mean is that the statement of accounts would go to full council, and that would be just before the end of September. I believe it's 24th of September is the date for full council. We will have to just wait and see in terms of whether the audit work can be completed, because clearly, while we had our timescales that we were trying to keep to from an external audit point of view, there is a lot of work and a lot of programming that they are having to fit in across the across their region to try and get a whole series of accounts audited within the various timescales. And on the back of that, we may need to consider whether that final audited statement of accounts can actually come to full council in September. We will be asking full council, as was agreed at a previous audit committee, for a delegation to enable the audit committee to sign off the accounts in future. So as necessary, we may need to consider a kind of a single item emergency audit committee if we are unable to meet that 30th of September deadline. I just wanted to just quickly run through that, just so that you were clear in terms of the process that we're working to. In terms of the statement of accounts itself, these are produced in the usual format, and as part of the report, we've got the statement of account attached, and we've also got attached to Appendix 2 an analytical review, which identifies the key variances between the 18-19 figures in the statement of accounts and the 19-20 figures. So if a variance is more than £8 million, we will have identified it. If it's less than £8 million, but it's in excess of 10% of the figure from the previous year, then that variance would also be picked up within that analytical review. So there's details included within Appendix 2, which provide some information as to why those variations are there. Now, in terms of the meeting today, we've also got Cheryl Sedgley, who's my deputy Section 151 officer, is also at the meeting, and also Nikki Higgins and Neil Stewart, and those three have been working incredibly hard into the night, over the weekends, you name it, to try and get these accounts produced within the timescales that we set, and within the more difficult situation we find ourselves in, whereby across the authority, the information that we would normally get, they're standing over people's desks to try and get things completed, can't be done. So instead, this is a case of Teams meetings, emails, and remote working to try and get all of this information pulled together. So despite the fact that the deadline was extended, that's still turned to be an enormous task. And I'm very grateful to the team for being able to produce the report that we have before us today. So I won't go into any of the detail. There's far too many pages and far too much detail for me to take you through the statement of accounts. What I will do is open it up to any questions that the committee have, and as usual, any difficult questions that come along, I will immediately defer to the previous officers that I mentioned, who will then be able to provide you with the answer that you require. Thank you, Chair.
Okay. Sorry, who was that? So I thought someone called through there. Oh, sorry, I've got an echo. So I've got an echo at this end. Oh, it's gone now. Thank James. Yeah. In case I forget later, can I thank you and your staff for all the work in compiling this? It's obviously, as you said, a vast amount of work needs to be done in very trying circumstances. So can you make sure you pass, and I'm sure I speak for the committee as well. Right, committee members, have you any questions for James and his team on this report?
Peter, Brian Williams here.
Brian, righto.
Can I say that you have the absolute support of your team in the remarks you made about you have the support of your committee in the remarks that you made about James and his team. We are very fortunate to have such dedicated officers. One relatively small point on page 111. It's the last paragraph of the main report, and I'd just be grateful if James could elaborate on the materiality threshold, which was 10% or 8 million. Are those alternatives? Is it whichever is the least? Could you clarify that for the committee, James, please?
Yep. So through your chair, what we've done there is any variance that is in excess of 8 million will be shown. But if there are any variances that are less than 8 million, but which are more than 10% of a variance, so if a 11% variance was £3 million, that would be shown because it's more than 10%. But even if it was only 1%, if it's more than £8 million, that would be shown. So that's the level of materiality that we've picked up.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I haven't got anyone. Oh, yes, I have. Chris Mellings has just requested to speak. Councillor Mellings.
Sorry, Chairman. Chris Mellings, member of the committee. Like my two colleagues, wish to place on record thanks to the team for the work in pulling together this document. It's always a difficult job, I know, but this year even more so. So it is appreciated. And I'm glad that some members of the team are here to hear those comments. In terms of the detail, recently the National Audit Office produced a very helpful sort of document setting out guidance for audit committees as to sort of some of the issues that they need to explore with things like financial reporting, vis-a-vis annual accounts, etc. One of the areas that they cover, which is probably pertinent to us to a degree, especially given the circumstances, is around valuations on assets. And I just wonder what has been the process this year for carrying out those evaluations as a result of COVID. Have we been able to use the usual process? So they are a fair and reasonable assessment, or have we had to do something slightly different? In terms of short-term debtors, obviously that's shown in the paper as having increased by 20%, and in the narrative it does set out some of the reasons why that is. But when you strip those out, the figure has still gone up by another 3 million. So I just wonder where some of that might lie. What are the issues around that? And in terms of the value of the debtors on the sales ledger, which was as a result of invoices, the timing of invoices, was that associated with the new financial system that had been implemented during the course of the year? Next question. I think we talked about this last year, and that was the issue relating to cash and cash equivalents and bank overdraft. And I think at the time James explained the reason why there was a need of an overdraft at the end of the year, which was largely only a couple of days. Well, obviously that's sort of increased by 109% this year. And when you look at the amount of cash that we've got on hand, I never quite sort of get my head around why, when we're sitting on a mountain of cash and we're, and now that the overdraft is sort of 15.5 million. In the grand scale of our finances, I know that's relatively small, but even so, but I'm guessing that the same issues are applicable there. And then finally, and I know it's one that we tend to focus on a little bit, is around local taxation debtors. And of course, the figures show that last year that went up by 14%. So we're now actually got 13.5 million in uncollected local taxes, some of which goes back a fair few years. and it does seem that does tend to increase year on year. So I just wonder, amongst everything else that we're having to cope with at the moment, whether there is any light at the end of the tunnel. And I suspect that debt collection this year may be a challenge as far as local taxes is concerned, but obviously that represents money that, if it's collected, is available to support local services at a time when they're under financial pressure anyway. But being a former revenues officer, I know the challenges that are involved in collecting money. And I also wonder at what point, where if debt is just being held on the books because it's not collectible, let's get it written off, because it's just given a false impression, and we might as well deal with it so that we can focus on where we can make an impact on collecting unpaid council tax and business rates. Thanks, Chairman.
Thank you. Does anyone else wish to speak? I've got no one listed.
So do you want to take that, Chair?
Yes, I was just going to come back to you. I have no one else to speak, but if you just finish off, James, and then we'll go to the recommendation.
Okay, so in terms of those questions, I can pick up a couple of them. I'll pick up the easy ones and leave the more difficult ones for the team to come back on. So just in terms of the bank overdraft position, so absolutely, it does raise questions as to why, with significant cash balances, we would ever find ourselves in a position of an overdraft. I think it was more complicated this year because just before the end of the financial year, there was the COVID-19 and ring-fenced grants. There's one payment came through, which was about £9 million, and then there was the 91 million, or a significant proportion thereof, of the business rates, the business grants that came through. So why, in receiving all of that cash, would we then have a bigger overdraft? Is the kind of the obvious question that you'd raise. But of course, when that amount of money comes in, what we can't do is just leave that sat there in the council's accounts. So what we have to do is we have to invest that using the security, liquidity and yield basis, and we need to invest that money. So what we had to try and do was estimate, with those significant funds, how quickly we would need to be drawing those funds down to pay them out to the relative areas. So do we invest something for a couple of days and then the money will come back ready for payment, or do we invest it for a week, or do we invest it for a month, or longer than that? Because obviously we get a greater return if we invest it for a longer period. So we had to make a judgment in terms of how long that would be invested for over the end of the financial year, and as it would happen, we have very short-term loans. So other local authorities are quite happy to provide funding in. That's their investment on the other side of that. So all the time we are either bringing investments back, or we are taking in short-term loans. And the question that we ask ourselves is, if we need some short-term liquidity and we've got, let's say, £10 million tied up until the end of next week, do we want to pull that funding back, which means we would then forego that interest rate for that cash tied up till the end of next week, or would it be cheaper to just borrow to borrow £10 million for 2 days, because actually that's all that we would need to be able to manage the cash flow over that period. So that happens all the time. That's happening on a daily basis, and those judgments are being taken to make sure that the cash is and the accounts is liquid. When you then have a line drawn in the sand at the 31st of March, whatever that position is, that's what gets reported. The point is we don't do anything different at the end of the year, so that whatever it is whatever it is, and that just gets reported. But it's a very valid question. In terms of the write-offs for council tax and business rates, I'm receiving those on a regular basis. So the Revs and Bens team are going through that. They are continually reviewing the amount of debt that we have. And in terms of the council tax and business rates collection fund, that was a surplus at the end of last year, and part of that was because of recovery of funds from previous years. But as part of that recovery process, there is a need to write off that unrecoverable. So that goes through a two-stage process, gets to me, and then I consider and will review any particular items within that. But that's writing off debt from a few pence to maybe several £1,000s, which could go back several years. The more that we can deal with, the tidier the accounts and the ledger are. But clearly, you know, I don't like writing debts off, so we'll always try and recover those if we think we can, as far as possible into the future. If I hand over to Cheryl now, who may then pass the baton on to Neil or Nikki in relation to the other questions you raised around the valuations, the debtors and the sales.
Thank you, James. Cheryl Sedgley, Head of Finance. I'll deal with the debtors question and then hand over the valuations one to Neil. So short-term debtors did increase over the course of the year. So we've put an explanation as to the main reasons, but there has been an increase in the level of debt that's outstanding on our sundry debtor ledger at the end of the year. I think, without picking through individual invoices, I would say overall we did have to factor in the fact that we got a new finance system this year. So from the 1st of April, the team were getting to grips with that new finance system, which they'd had training on, but you don't get as good training as you do actually when you're using the system. So some of our debt recovery actions might have been a little bit slower in the early part of 2019-20 than they would have been normally while we got to grips with that financial system. And of course now we're trying to catch up with that, so I think as a result there was a slight increase in how much debt was outstanding at the end of the year, but we are looking at that as a team to try and put actions in place to ensure that that comes down again in this next financial year. In terms of the invoices being raised later and so impacting on the debtors figure, again, that is slightly impacted on the fact that we had the new finance system. So in 18-19, we had to close down the old finance system, SAMIS, an awful lot earlier than we would normally have done for close down. So as a result of that, we put various deadlines in place. So things like invoices being raised were raised a lot earlier in the process. They'd normally wait until close down to be raised. So we got the final year-end position. Obviously, we did that a lot earlier in 2018-19. 2019-20, it's gone back more to a normal sort of process, and as a result, that's been the change as to why it's now fed into the debtors figure. I'll hand over to Neil now, if I can, just on valuations and what we've done around that. Neil.
Hi, Neil Stewart, Strategic Management Accountant. Yeah, the approach for valuations this year was that as states, they did some were done in-house, but they also outsourced an external valuation agency to do a desktop valuation exercise as at the 31st of the 3rd 20, so that all valuations were correct, well up to date as at balance sheet date. Obviously within that, COVID-19 had affected just a few weeks before that. So although they have done that, it was based on their best information they had at that point. And obviously there is a material uncertainty clause that they have put within the valuation report, saying that's obviously based on the best knowledge. But obviously events may affect that, but that's more likely to be going forward than in terms of the valuations in the balance sheet.
Thank you, folks. Appreciate that.
Thank you. Right. So does any other committee member have a question? No? Right. Then we'll move the recommendation on page 107 to receive and comment on the draft statement of accounts. Do I have a proposer for that?
I'll propose. Brian here.
Thank you. And a seconder?
Yes, Chris.
Councillor Michael Wood, our second.
Okay. Anyone dissenting? No, right, that one's carried then. It's just coming up to 3 o'clock now. If we take the 10-minute break I spoke of, and we'll return at 3:10.
May I remind members that the meeting continues to be broadcast, so please ensure that your microphones are switched off during the break.
Thank you. I'm sure we can go. We can do that. Thank you.
And cameras, Chairman.
So, okay, everybody, right, we'll go and just have this 10-minute break then.
Present, Chairman.
Okay, thank you everybody. It is now 3:10, so we will resume the meeting with item 11, overall assurance, annual governance statement and review of the effectiveness of the council's internal controls and structures code of corporate governance. And I think we have James to lead on this one.
Well, James.
We do, thank you, Chair. James Walton, Council's Director of Finance. So again, I will briefly introduce the annual governance statement that's been produced this year. It's a requirement of the Accounts and Audit Regulations that we produce an annual governance statement. This is produced alongside the Statement of Accounts, and it's signed by the leader of the council and the head of paid service. And a significant amount of work goes into the production of the annual governance statement, which takes a long period of time and looks over the 1920 financial year and ensures that all of the key governance issues for the authority are identified and considered as part of that process. So this takes several months to produce. It goes up and down the organisation. There are assurance statements that are produced by senior members of the council's staff. These are considered, reviewed, challenged, and goes right the way through the organisation until to the directors team who consider it, and then there is also consideration by the audit committee themselves as the information is passed through to members and consideration asked and responses requested in relation to those issues. While the actual statement itself covers the last financial year, there is also a requirement as part of that to look at any key governance issues that would be going forward, identified for going forward, and as part of that, an action plan is drawn up. So within the appendices to the covering report, as well as the annual governance statement for 1920, which within it includes actions for going forward into the 2021 financial year. There's the code of corporate governance attached as well, but also the annual governance statement action plan from the previous financial year, which identifies those areas that were considered at that point and provides an update so that Audit Committee can consider whether those actions have been dealt with adequately and appropriately since the last time it was reviewed. So happy to take any questions as necessary, Chair.
Okay, thank you. I've got no one listed as wanting to speak. Does anyone wish to speak? Chris Mellings. Yes. Councillor Chris Mellings.
Thank you, Chairman. Chris Mellings, member of the committee. Thank you, James, for presenting the report and the detail. One of the things we covered at our training session was a suggestion from SIPFA in one of its briefing documents around questions that members of the committee need to be about adequate arrangements to ensure appropriate scrutiny, decision making, etc. as a result of COVID. I just want to acknowledge the briefing notes that Tom Dodds subsequently provided to us, which was setting out those arrangements. And because I'm conscious from several members that they felt that the way in which scrutiny was slow to react was not helpful necessarily. And it's interesting to note that one of the scrutiny committees that was due to continue, the Health Committee, with the links that it has obviously with pandemics, etc., only met on the 20th of July. Now, I'm not sure to what extent members of the Audit Committee have had experience of the scrutiny process over the last few months, so it may be an unfair judgment for us to be asked to make. But I guess in terms of business continuity going forward, if, God forbid, we ever end up in a similar situation again, then perhaps there needs to be, there are always going to be lots of lessons to learn with these sort of things, and perhaps now is not the time to reflect on that. But there may come a point in time where that might be useful to look at how scrutiny and other things operated during this challenging time. So that's to acknowledge that. Secondly, at 6.3 on page 317, it refers to Appendix C and the issue around dealing with governance issues from the previous year's AGS. And in Appendix C itself, it refers to an activity 4.2, and that was about the Chief Executive setting directorate objectives that should be linked closely to the financial strategy. And the commentary in March 2020, obviously because of circumstances at that time, with the departure of the Chief Executive in sort of late February, beginning of March, it says this documentation is not completed. Given that we've had interims in place, I just wonder why that has not been completed, or is it something that a full-time chief executive needs to take a lead on, and therefore when a new chief executive is appointed in a few months' time, that will be picked up as part of that. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Just to point out on your first bit about scrutiny and their level of performance, Chris, can I just note that as the Audit Committee, we have fulfilled all our timetable this year without exception, and Cheryl was able to give us an extra bit of a late extra bit of training today. So I think some of your question needs to be answered by the chairman of the various scrutiny committees. But beyond that, have you anything else to add, James, to the questions that Chris has raised?
Yeah, well, certainly in terms of the performance appraisals undertaken by the Chief Executive, just as a general point. So the appraisals were due around that period of time. So that would have been looking at the January, February, March period, which, as the Councillor correctly said, that was at the point at which the Chief Executive left. The interim Chief Executives were then brought in with a view to appointing a new Chief Executive as quickly as possible after that. Obviously, with the impact of COVID-19 hitting very shortly afterwards, that then changed somewhat the remit of the role of those joint interim chief executives to more around just focusing on the overall business, and so there will be across the organisation a number of processes over this period of time that have been parked for one reason or another. Obviously, we are looking at the recruitment process for a new chief executive, and the reality is that you know, from the start of the year, we would now be looking at the completion of that, also the in-year review of that appraisal process around about now. So the fact that those haven't been completed or taken up, I think is validated by you know, timing and the reality of the impact of the pandemic. But it is a point that is still outstanding. So I will raise it with the interim chief execs just to ensure that they are they're able to provide me with a response, and I'll pass that back to committee as necessary.
Okay, thank you. Does any other members have any questions?
Yes, Brian here, Brian Williams.
Brian, right.
If I can take you all to page 334. Page 334. And I address my question to Kerry. If we look at the almost the end of the shaded part of the report, it says business world is flagged as a potential risk in terms of transparency, given the inadequate levels of assurance that can be evidenced around the system in its first year of operation. Well, there was no reference to business world in Kerry's internal report, annual audit report, and earlier in which we discussed earlier. And I presume that this must be some sort of business world covers a multitude of sins or something. Would Kerry elaborate a bit on that, please?
Yes, through you, Chair. Kerry Plafsky, Head of Audit. Business World, whilst it was being set up, we looked at it as a separate audit, but now it's embedded behind all the systems. So all those main financial systems, your payroll, your debt collection, your creditors, your general ledger, they all use Business World now. So those assurances given on those systems are effectively giving you assurances on the Business World system, which hence that's why it's being flagged as a potential risk while it's being embedded into the council's operations. Thank you, Chair.
If I may come back on that.
Yes. Brian, did you have a subsequent question?
Hello,
yes.
Peter.
You want to go on?
Yes, I did. I wanted to come back a little on that. If Business World covers a considerable number of operations, effectively, unless all those operations are adequate or above, Business World will always be flagged as a potential risk. Business World, in that sense, will never be at the level we would hope it would be, I guess. Is that a fair summary of the future?
I think because it's such a corporate system, there are elements that make the whole up. As those are improved and managers have given assurances that they will be improving those internal controls, the strength of controls and governance through that system should improve, but they are very, very linked to each other.
Right. Is that all the questions we have? Right. I'll go to the recommendations on page 315 then. Recommendations A and B. Do I have a proposer?
Councillor Michael Wood, move.
Right. Do I have a seconder?
Councillor Owen Jones.
Okay. Do I have anyone dissenting on that? Okay, so the recommendations there are carried, and now we go on to probably one of the most important reports today, which is report 12, the third line assurance. It's our annual assurance report of the audit committee that will go to the council later on in the year. And James, is this you reporting again?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. James Walton, Council's Director of Finance. I will very briefly introduce this. This is the, as you say, the annual report that goes through to Council. It identifies the work that's been undertaken over the year and includes at the start of it the recommendation to Audit Committee to consider the contents of the annual assurance report and identify if there are any other areas that you'd like to consider or would like to comment upon. And then it also at 2.2 includes a recommendation to Council, which is to consider the contents of that report. So within that there is a statement. Appendix A includes the statement from the chairman of the audit committee and sets out all of the areas that have been considered and worked on over the year. As you say, Chair, this is a very important document demonstrating the work of audit committee over the last 12 months. So rather than spending time introducing it, I'm happy to take any questions or to consider any issues that members would like to make.
Okay, thank you. Kerry, Head of Audit for the public. Are any comments you would like to make?
None that I would add at this stage. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Right, members of the committee, do you have any questions? And Chris Mellings.
Thank you, Chairman. Chris Mellings, member of the committee. I know the report follows the standard format, which sets out our work during the year, which is comprehensive as ever. Just under 2.2, I know this is that section is a recommendation to council, but I think we probably just need to reread that because it doesn't make sense if I can put it that way, because particularly at the bit at the end where it refers to recommending accepting the report, that to me doesn't read right. So we just need to sort of reframe that. But there seems to be, given the discussions we've had today and indeed throughout the year, there seems to be a bit of a mismatch, and it may be that I misunderstood the process, because right at the very end, on page 372, it says that the audit committee can provide reasonable assurance, etc., etc., etc. However, today we've already had a report from Kerry that gives a limited assurance. So I just wonder really how, as a committee, we can advise council that we're able to get reasonable assurance when one of our key pieces of assurance is telling us that it's limited. So I'd just be interested to know what discussion took place about reaching that reasonable conclusion for the committee, and whether there's something I've not taken into account. The other thing that concerns me slightly is that obviously there are different levels of assurance that we're seeking throughout the year, and at the moment there appears to be one key bit of the jigsaw that is missing, and that's the view of the external auditor, which I appreciate we don't get until they have looked through the final accounts, etc., etc. So again, and I must admit I've not picked this up in previous years, where I'm guessing the process is the same, but how we can reach a conclusion on assurance without having the external auditor's perspective on issues. Although I know we've had a little bit of it throughout the year as they've carried out their work in advance of the year-end processes. Although it refers to last year as having an unqualified audit opinion, obviously the last couple of years the external auditors have raised with us the concern or the need for the council to be very mindful of the sustainability and viability issues, and obviously that takes on an added level now as a result of recent months. So I'm just wondering, somewhere within the commentary we ought to be reflecting a similar concern, that whilst obviously issues are as they're set out in the report, that the committee echoes the concerns of the external auditor in terms of the future sustainability of the council, just so that it reinforces. Council is already aware, I think, of a lot of those issues and challenges ahead, but I think it just gives another level if the audit committee are also saying that as part of its annual report. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Chris. Any other members wish to speak?
No.
Chair, would you like me to respond, Kerry Platsky, Head of Audit, to some of the issues raised by Chris?
Yes, I was going to. I thought I'd see if anyone else had some others as well, but please respond to that.
Thank you. In giving the assurance, it's up to the audit committee to be satisfied with that level that they're going to propose. So in looking at your reasonable assurance, the key things to look at is in paragraph 11 summarises it. Overall, you're looking at governance, risk management, controls in relation to the areas of contracts and partnerships, fraud, corruption, whistleblowing, value for money, financial reporting and treasury management. So it's all that work that's come through to you, and your awareness of the culture and the organisation of the council. So paragraph 12 shows you the summary given each of the pieces of work that are reported to the audit committee. And in that summary, in some areas there's reasonable assurances, in other areas there are areas for improvement. Yes, it always looks back at the external auditor's latest assurance, because that's probably all they can give us at this point in time. So it is slightly retrospective from that point of view, but it's very much how comfortable you are as a committee and whether you want to adjust that reasonable assurance to reflect anything else. So it's about the information in this report, the information you're getting today from the AGS, annual governance statement, the code of governance, you're getting from your financial experts through the statement of accounts, and your knowledge of the organisation's controls from myself, from your external audit reports that you've had throughout the year since their opinion last year, and all that information. If you feel that that reasonable assurance isn't sitting comfortably, then it's very much for the committee to make that decision, Chair.
Thank you, Kerry. Do any committee members have any comments on what the head of audit has just told us?
Just taking into consideration what Kerry has just told us, and the question that Chris has asked, and quite rightly asked too. Peter, I was going to ask, following that, you've obviously seen, and this report stands in your name. Are you content with the recommendations as worded?
I'm content with the paragraph 12, line 1, where it basically says there are reasonable arrangements for corporate government, because I think what Chris is right in that we do have some areas of concern, but we also have areas that are doing quite well, so they balance each other out, some of them. So on that, I'm reasonably happy. The overall reasonable, but I'm actually quite glad that we haven't come up with unqualified, because an unqualified account at this date I think would be an incorrect assessment, and therefore on this occasion I'm quite prepared to go with Kerry's assessment of the situation.
I think, Chris, that given that the last external auditor comments was yes raising some issues and has continued to do so through the year, I think we can't look forward to what's going to come later. And as in previously we're looking up to the 31st of March, aren't we? Whilst I accept the point that you're rightly making, I think with the assurance that we've just received from Kerry, and that Peter is content with the way it is worded, I think I'm inclined to accept that viewpoint. Please, Chris, if you think I welcome always your contribution, as you full well know. So,
likewise,
and certainly we wouldn't want to be in any way in contradiction over as important a report as this. So I do ask you how you feel after the explanations we received.
If I might come back, Chairman, and I think you're right. This is a very important report because it's in our ownership, so we need to be sort of satisfied. So the discussion, I think, around that issue is helpful. I would feel more comfortable if that final paragraph at the top of page 372 is amended in some way to reflect that conversation that we've had, that yes, whilst there are some limitations that have been identified because of other issues, sorry, I'm sort of paraphrasing very crudely there, the committee has reached that decision, so at least anybody else reading this can see that we have given that consideration. Because, as I say, the fact that our internal auditor, and particularly on those fundamental systems that underpin the council, I know that's one piece of the jigsaw, that's a pretty significant issue that we can't ignore, and I'm not saying we are ignoring it. So if that final paragraph, and I'm sorry to create further work for people, can be reworked in some way to cover that, then I think it's important that the committee is unanimous on an issue like this. So I certainly want to sort of be aside from that. But if it's possible to reflect that in some way, then I'm happy to support that, and I'm grateful to colleagues for their comments on the issue.
Chris, through you, Chairman, Councillor Michael Wood again. Chris, have you got some little reflection there on how you'd like to see that changed? Would you then be content? I'm guessing that you're content then with the recommendation as set out in 2.2. But have you got any thoughts on how you'd like to change that last paragraph, insert something, remove something?
I must admit that's an absolutely fair challenge. It's always dangerous for me to do things on the hoof. I must admit, when I was initially thinking about it, I was sort of thinking that that the committee just simply changed the word from reasonable to limited, but obviously we moved on from that, and I haven't off the top of my head got a form of words now. Whether in terms of the decision-making process we're unable to go away and come up with some appropriate words that can be agreed by email by the committee, whether that's appropriate. But other than that, I'd certainly be able to support the recommendations set out at the beginning of the report. I'm sorry, that's a bit of a cop-out, really, but
yes, it is.
I want to get it right as well.
It is. It's a lovely cop-out. We're not time constrained on this, are we, James? You can just nod. We're not time constrained, so we have got a couple of days for reflection on how that paragraph. James is nodding, as you can all see. Can I suggest, Chris, that maybe liaising with Kerry and with Peter, the chairman, that we get a form of words that satisfies us all, and it's circulated by email. Yeah. And so then you're prepared to accept the recommendations as set out in 2.2. Chairman, in that case, I'll move the recommendations.
And I'll second that. Yeah, that's a perfect solution. Thank you.
Unmute, please, Peter.
Sorry, before we go to the final vote on that, I think Kerry wishes to add something. Is that correct?
I did, Chair, but I think we've discussed it round and come to a solution. So thank you.
So you're for what's just been put forward by Michael, you're quite happy.
Yes, I'll catch up with yourself and Councillor Chris Mellings and agree the precise wording.
Okay.
Brian here, can I come in on that?
Yeah.
I should be very unhappy if the word reasonable was changed to limited. As I look at that paragraph, what we're saying is that we have reasonable assurance on the processes. We're not talking about the assurance that we give or that Kerry has given on the individual, the results of the individual processes. But we are saying, and we've always believed this, I think, that as an audit committee, the processes that we go through, found the reports, the explanations, the insurances that we look at that have been given to us, we're saying that the council has in place adequate, we're saying exactly what the wording here says. And I think that that does lead me to believe that that is a reasonable assurance. And though I don't mind the words being altered, I would oppose any downgrading of the assurance for below reasonable. Okay.
Okay. So I just have to inform the committee that I am apparently going to be shut down in 9 minutes and 19 seconds now for some sort of update. Now, I don't know if I'm going to be offline permanently or when it's those things, it just cuts off and I come back. So I can see. Hello?
We have IT working on it at the moment.
We do. It's all right. They've just put a message on saying your computer is about to be switched off.
Chairman, I've had that on numerous occasions, and if you just keep going on, it seems to work.
Oh right. Well, we'll keep going. I mean, I'm not going to switch off. It's just that it's just inconvenient. Right. So,
Chairman, just to reassure Brian, Chris Mellings, member of the committee again. I'm not. My preference would be to change the word, but I understand the strength of the argument. All I'm suggesting is that the commentary includes a reference to the limited assurance that's been given, but that the committee can provide reasonable assurance taking into account all the other issues. So if that's of some reassurance to Brian, I'm not suggesting we change the word. It's more the commentary that supports that.
That's right. I think.
Okay, I'll go with that. Thank you, Chris.
Okay. Right.
Thank you, Brian.
So we had Michael propose. Who seconds? Councillor Bennings will second. Anyone dissent from that? No. Okay, then with that proviso of an amendment further later on, we'll take that as passed. Okay, right, and we now go on to item 13. Item 13, third line assurance, external audit fee letter, and yes. So are our external auditors here?
Yes, Chair. I don't know if the Director of Finance wishes to speak to this item. I'm quite happy to speak to it, but I don't know if James wants to speak to it.
Right, James, you want to speak to it?
So very quickly, James Walton, Councillor Finance.
On one set of notes I've got you, and on the other set of notes I've got the external audit engagement lead. So if we start with you then, okay?
Yeah, that's absolutely fine, Chair. So yeah, James Walton here, Council's Director of Finance. So this is just a report which identifies the scale fee for the 2021 financial year and the update on 1920. So the information is contained there, but clearly that's just covers off the scale fee for 2021. There may be additional costs or alterations to that, and it may be that colleagues from Grant Thornton wish to update us on that. Otherwise, I have to take any questions.
Okay, can I just sorry, Michael.
Chairman, I was just going to say this used to be the opportunity for us all to have a bit of fun with Grant in the past, as you remember. But essentially, the report is exactly what it is. It's taken really out of our hands to negotiate this down by starting with 15% and arriving back at 7.5%. But that isn't the case these days. I'm going to take the opportunity to just say thank you to the auditors. I move the recommendations as set out in paragraph 2.
Okay.
Brian here, I entirely agree. I second.
Okay, I've got someone signaling from the external auditors. Could I just ask you before we go any further to introduce yourselves and then the comment that needs to be made. So
certainly, Richard Percival here. I'm the External Audit Engagement Lead. My colleague Mary Wren, the External Audit Manager, is also on the call and will speak to some of the following items. I just wanted to be clear with the committee. The letter from PSAA that is attached does make clear that this is the scale fee, and there's no expectation that audit fees will be at the scale fee. Members will recall that in our audit plan we have a fee variation for this year of 23,500, which relates to the increased audit quality requirements since the contract was let. I would expect a similar variation for 2021. Those quality requirements aren't changing. And for 2021, the value for money conclusion work changes to a value for money commentary, requiring further work from the auditors. Although we've not costed that out yet, I would anticipate that to be somewhere in the region of £25,000 of additional audit cost. So where you've got 103,000, I think the real fee is going to be close to 150,000. So I just wanted to make sure that members were clear about that.
So is my arithmetic right? It was 103 and you said 28. I'll make that 130,000.
Yes, Chair, and a further 25,000 for the change in the value for money requirements.
Got
okay.
It. Thank you. Right, so Mary, did you want to say something?
No, Chair, I was just wanted to say hello to everyone, given that the last time I saw you were in a very different world, and I will be presenting the next report. So I'm Mary Wren, Audit Manager.
Okay. Just if I could ask you, when you present your report, just start by giving the people your full name. Okay, right. So with that amendment to the actual cash in the fees, we've had the proposal proposed and seconded. Do I have any people objecting? No, okay. So that recommendation is passed. And now we go on to item 14, a third line assurance, external audit and audit plan update, which is to be found, I think, on page 389 of the bundles.
Thank you, Chair. Mary Wren, Grant Thornton, Audit Manager. I'll just take a brief summary through the report. In February, we presented our audit plan for 1920 audit, and in danger of stating the obvious, the world has changed significantly since this time. So, as part of our local government, while within local government and across all local government clients, we have actually issued an update to all audit plans regarding COVID-19 and the impact specifically relating to the audit. This does raise additional areas we need to consider for 1920, and this is what this report summarises. This is a risk, as I say, which has been raised across all local government audits and across other sectors too. So the details are derived to on page 3 of our report and page 391 of your pack. This addendum to our planning from February is a summary of the additional work required in light of COVID-19, and it focused on key areas such as the impacts of remote working and the impact this may actually have on our audit procedures. Some key areas where there'll be additional focus is the review of going concern, financial planning and cash flow going forwards, and actually a review of the controls in place at the council and how remote working, for example, could have impacted on those controls and the knock-on effect, how that could impact on the audit work as well. So COVID-19 is part of that, and also our work around value for money was ongoing as February. So that work has now been completed from a planning perspective and is summarised on page 392 of your pack. The page 4 that actually summarises the risk identified, which does continue to relate to the financial sustainability, and obviously is very linked with funding changes and review of financial planning that is happening in relation to COVID-19 too. So it's just an update report from our original planning to highlight those additional areas which we will need to look at, and we'll report to committee on those items. Happy to take any questions about the content of the report or the risks identified. Thank you.
Thank you.
Peter, Councillor Wood, are you still with us?
He looks quite frozen, I would suggest, so I'm not sure if the computer update has kicked in.
Yeah, I think we've lost the chair. Is the vice chair able to take over in the interim? He asks pointedly.
Yeah, well, absolutely. I don't know. Am I going to get lost? Do we have a black hole into which we are gradually disappearing? Who knows? Right. Are there any comments on this report? If there are no comments, can I?
No comments. Move. We receive the report.
Is that seconded?
Chris Mellings, seconded.
And does any other member wish to dissent? Not many left. Okay, so all in favour of the report? Yes, we go. Now, if I turn to the agenda, which I had put on one side, relying on the chairman, who has negligently failed to remain in the meeting, I think we now come to the item 15, external audit informing the risk assessment. Richard, are you able to take us forward on this?
I'll take this report, Chair. Thank you. It's Mary Wren, Grant Thornton, Audit Manager. As part of our audit planning, there are a number of key areas which we've discussed with management, and this document will be quite familiar to you over the years. Obviously, it's come to committee. Now, some of the key areas that we talk about and cover include fraud, for example, laws and regulations, accounting estimates and how they're considered, going concern, and it all forms this rather chunky document of 40+ pages from the responses that management have given, and thank you to management for going through this with us too. So management's responses are summarised here, and the purpose of this is really to triangulate those responses with committee and as those charged with governance, and really to obtain your feedback or corroboration. Ultimately, are the responses within this report given to us by management in line with this committee's understanding of how things operate within the council. So it's for information and for comment. Happy to take any questions or note down any points that you may wish to raise to change within the report. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mary. I've no doubt members have read this report line by line. Are there any questions on it, please? Any questions for Mary?
Yes, Chairman, Councillor Wood. Yes, line by line, Chairman. Mary, can I just take it to page 400? I don't know what it is on yours, but it was the question about is there any use of financial instruments, including derivatives? It's the actual question itself that mystifies me. I mean, why would a council want to use derivatives?
It's to be fair through you, Chair, it's quite a standard comment within the questions, so taking it forward, you know, that will be tailored, but we are seeing more complex arrangements happen across local authorities and the public sector generally, so they can occur very, very rarely, but it's, you know, going forward, it's something we may adapt in the question, so we can amend that going forward. Take your point. Why would they?
Thank you.
Okay, will somebody move that the report be accepted with thanks?
Councillor Wood, I'll move the report, as you say, with thanks. Look for a seconder.
Owen Jones.
Okay, anybody dissenting? All in favour? Thank you. Right, that's passed with thanks. We now move on to the next report, which I've got my agenda correctly, is on page 449, the Pension Fund Audit Plan. Now, this has not a great deal to do with us, I suggest, but...
Sorry, Chair. I think you've missed item 16.
Oh, sorry. Indeed we have. I do apologise. Audit Progress Report and Sector Update, page 433 to 448. Richard, is this you?
It is, Chair. Thank you very much. Richard Purcell, Grant Thornton Engagement Lead. I'll take the report as read. I'd just like to concentrate really on one issue in talking about the report. We drafted the report a couple of weeks ago. We'd started the audit visit for the final accounts by then. James has explained that some of the pressures that the finance team have been under to deliver the accounts, which we appreciate very much. Mary has explained our audit plan in terms of COVID and the impact that has. And top of the list is the impact of remote working. Where we are today is the plan that we have, which is to deliver the opinion in time for council at the end of September, is vulnerable. I have to say I'm more pessimistic than James at the moment that we will achieve that. I've reviewed the file and considered the progress we've been able to make during July, which is when we've been, I was going to say, been on site. We've not, figuratively been on site. And although we've made some progress, we've not made enough progress. So I just think it's important that the committee is aware that there is a definite, well, there is a vulnerability around the ability to deliver that opinion by the end of September, and I would strongly recommend that you have a clear contingency plan in place to enable that to be slipped into October. The team will finish this visit next Friday as scheduled. Currently, I have no availability until late September to finish the work, so it's very dependent on how much work is outstanding when we get to next Friday. So, as far as the rest of the progress report is concerned, I was going to take that as read, but I'm very happy to take questions on the report or on the comments that I've just made, Chair.
Well, Richard, that's a very honest introduction of the situation and rather brutal report on the situation. James, have you anything to say about what contingency plan we may have? Is this sort of mean a very rapid meeting in mid-October, something of that nature of this committee?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. James Walton, Council Director of Finance. Yeah, basically what we'll need to look at is getting an audit committee meeting set up for late October to give us time so that we have a reasonable contingency. We don't want to just push it back a week or so. We want to give ourselves enough time for that contingency to actually work. We are, as I said earlier, we will have in place by then, because Council will have sat in September, there will be a delegation through to Audit Committee to sign off the full audited accounts by that October date. So rather than trying to convene Council, our contingency arrangements would just be around convening the members for Audit Committee. That in itself is no mean task, just trying to get everybody together, but nevertheless that's what we will have to endeavour to do, make sure we quorum and able to hold that meeting in probably the third or fourth week in October.
Thank you, James. I think we, just digressing slightly, and I'll come back to Richard, I think perhaps Kerry and Tim Ward, our committee clerk, really should think about a date for a late October audit committee now, so that we can all get it into our diaries. The members can get it into their diary, rather than sort of leaving it hanging in the air till mid-October to say, oh, we're having a meeting in 10 days time. So if you could book a room and set a date, officers, I think we would be grateful. Now back to Richard. Or any questions on Richard's statement? Any members of any queries or questions on Richard's?
As Councillor Michael Wood, as Richard suggested, you know, that leave it as it is, and you've asked the question I was going to ask of James, so on that basis I'm prepared to accept the report.
Can we have a seconder?
Chris Melling, second.
Okay, and the other two of us, I guess, are in favour, Ian? Yep. Okay. Thank you for that. So that's that report is received, and thank you, as I say again, Richard, for your frankness. It is appreciated. Right. We now.
Okay, thank you. So, hello, Brian.
Yes. You're back.
I've just got myself back. Yes.
Good. Well, you're just in time to introduce item 17, external audit. 17.
Oh well, our third line. So item 17, third line assurance, external audit, pension fund audit plan 2019 to 20. It'll be found on page 449. Thank you. Richard, are you introducing this?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, Richard Percival, external audit engagement lead for Grant Thornton. Just to inform the committee that this audit plan has been considered by the pensions committee already, but as a matter of process, and as this committee is those charged with governance overall, we bring the report to you for information. The things that I would just briefly like to flag in the report are on page 451 of the pack, and that's to tell you that we've identified three risks, significant risks: management override of control and revenue transactions, including fraudulent transactions. We identify those two risks for all audits, and the second one, the revenue ones, we are able to what we call rebut it. Basically, we look at the risk and say, actually, in reality, is there a risk here? Yes or no? And we determine no. The key risk is the valuation of level 3 investments. Now, clearly, we've talked about valuations a little bit today anyway, in other contexts, and level 3 investments are those investments that are the hardest to value. So the focus of our audit attention in this year in particular, with the impact of COVID-19, is on the risk of material misstatement of those valuations of those investments. To put the audit into a broader context, we have a £19 million materiality level, which is very similar to the prior year, and notwithstanding the comments that I've just made about the council audit, the pension fund audit has moved along significantly. We've made good progress, and I'm happy with where we are. Completion of the pension fund audit is clearly important, not just for its sake, but it's the completion of the council's audit is contingent on it, but also the completion of other admitted bodies audits as well is contingent on it. For example, Telford and Wrekin Council and Shropshire and Wrekin Fire Authority. So it's clearly important that we get the audit completed. That was all I was going to say on this item, but I'm very happy to take questions, Chair.
Do I have any questions for Richard on this?
I think they've all been asked in another place.
Right. Okay. Well, thank you. So, do I have a recommendation to note this report?
I move. Brian, I move.
Right.
Councillor Wood, agreed.
Okay. Anyone disagree? Right. Well, thank you, everybody, and thank you to the external auditors for your time and trouble and the information you've given us. Thank you. Right, and now we come to item 18, date and time of the next meeting. So that's the date and time of the next audit committee meeting will be on the 17th of September 2020 at 1:30 p.m. Right, so now this is where this is the end of the public meeting, and so I need to read out the following. I move that in accordance with the provision of Schedule 12A Local Government Act 1972 and paragraph 10.4 brackets 3 of the Council's Access to Information Procedural Rules, the public and press be excluded for the consideration of the remaining business. Do I have a proposer for that?
Move, Chairman, Councillor Wood.
Okay, and I'll second that. Does anyone disagree? Okay, we've now moving into the exempt part of the meeting.